All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today we're demystifying a piece of hardware that literally sits at the very heart of your computer's performance. We're breaking down everything you actually need to know about RAM. We'll cover what the different types are, what those speed numbers actually mean, and most importantly, how all of this impacts your real-world computing experience.
So have you ever wondered why two computers with the exact same processor can feel completely different? You know the scenario. One flies through tasks and seamlessly opens apps, while the other kind of crawls, stuttering every single time you open a new browser tab. Well, the secret to a snappy PC versus a sluggish one isn't always the processor or the graphics card. Very often, that secret is hiding right inside your motherboard's memory slots.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the RAM workbench, then trace the generations from SDRAM to DDR5. After that, we'll untangle the speed and latency paradox and wrap up with exactly how to choose your perfect RAM.
Okay, Section 1, the RAM workbench. What exactly is RAM and how does it work?
To get a clear picture, think of your main storage, your SSD or your hard drive, like a massive library. It securely holds absolutely everything, your files, your apps, your entire operating system. But grabbing a book from the back of that library takes time. So your computer uses RAM as a temporary workbench. When you open an application, the data jumps from your storage drive right onto this workbench so your CPU can grab it instantly. No waiting around, no searching. But here's the catch. Unlike your SSD, RAM is volatile. The second you turn your PC off, that workbench gets completely wiped clean. It's designed purely for blazing speed, not for safe long-term storage.
So when we're talking about RAM, there are two absolutely crucial metrics that matter. First is capacity, which is measured in gigabytes. Capacity basically dictates how many applications and files can fit on your workbench at the exact same time before your system has to start slowly swapping data back over to your SSD. The second metric is speed, measured in megahertz or megatransfers per second. And while capacity is pretty straightforward, speed is arguably the most misunderstood part of this whole equation.
Moving on to Section 2, Generations, SDRAM to DDR5. Let's look at the evolution of memory.
Memory technology has evolved through some very distinct generations, with each one getting significantly faster and more efficient than the last. Back in 1993, we had SDRAM, which finally synchronized with the CPU clock. Fast forward to 2000, and DDR, or double data rate, hit the scene, literally doubling effective speeds by transferring data twice per clock cycle. Now, notice the trend as we move forward. DDR2 in 2003 pushed speeds higher while dropping the voltage to 1.8 volts. Then DDR3 dropped it even further to 1.5 volts, hitting speeds up to 2133 megatransfers per second. Then came DDR4 in 2014, running at a super efficient 1.2 volts, which brought massive mainstream performance gains. And finally, in 2020, DDR5 arrived. This modern standard is pushing speeds anywhere from 4800 to over 8000 megatransfers per second on high-end kits, while also adding on-die error correction for better data reliability. Basically, every single step forward has been about pushing data faster while managing heat and power.
All right, Section 3, the speed and latency paradox.
This next concept is fascinating because it totally flips conventional wisdom on its head. Let's talk about the reality of latency. Say you're looking at a RAM kit rated at 3200 MHz and another rated at 6000 MHz. Naturally, you just assume the 6001 is vastly superior, right? Well, that's missing half the equation. Latency, specifically cast latency, or CL, is the actual delay between when the processor requests data and when the RAM actually delivers it. Let's run the numbers. A CL16 kit running at 3200 MHz has a real-world delay of about 10 nanoseconds. But a higher frequency 6000 MHz kit with a loose latency of, say, CL40, that has a delay of roughly 13 nanoseconds. Paradoxically, the kit with the lower megahertz rating is actually getting data to your CPU faster.
So how does this math impact your daily life?
Well, if you're a gamer, speed and latency are tightly linked to your CPU's performance. Believe it or not, upgrading from slow DDR4 to fast, low-latency DDR4 can actually net you 10 to 20% more frames in heavily CPU-bound games like Cyberpunk or Starfield. That is free performance without even touching your graphics card. On the flip side, if you're a content creator editing 4K video, your absolute priority is capacity. I mean, the fastest DDR5 in the world is totally useless if you only have 8 gigabytes, because your system will just immediately start swapping data to your SSD and your render times will tank. And for the everyday user, hitting a solid baseline capacity is what keeps your PC from grinding to a painful halt when you've got background apps running.
And what exactly is that baseline capacity today? 16.
16 gigabytes is the absolute minimum requirement for a comfortable modern computing experience. Just consider this for a second. Windows alone eats up 3 to 4 gigabytes of your RAM just sitting there completely idle. Add a web browser with 10 tabs open, Spotify in the background, maybe a video call, and an 8 gigabyte system becomes a massive, genuinely painful bottleneck.
Which brings us to Section 4, choosing your perfect RAM. Let's get into some actionable advice for your next upgrade.
When you're evaluating a memory upgrade, you really need a precise checklist. Step 1, and this is absolutely critical, know your platform. You cannot mix generations. A DDR5 stick of RAM literally will not fit into a DDR4 motherboard slot. They are physically keyed differently. Step 2, pinpoint your use case. Are you a gamer, a creator, or an everyday user? Step 3 is managing that budget. Please don't overspend on extreme raw speeds if you're never going to feel it in your daily tasks. And finally, balance your speed and capacity based on your specific profile.
Let's strip away all the guesswork and look at the actual performance per dollar sweet spots here. If you're gaming on an older DDR4 platform, you really want 16 gigabytes at 3600 MHz with a CL16 latency. Building a brand new DDR5 gaming rig? Target 16 to 32 gigabytes running at 6,000 megatransfers per second at CL30. Now, for content creators, regardless of your platform, you need a strict minimum of 32 gigabytes. You have to prioritize that massive workbench space over outright speed. And for everyday users, 16 gigabytes of standard 3200 MHz DDR4 is going to be more than sufficient. Take whatever budget you have left over and just put it toward a faster storage drive.
Now, there is one universal physical installation rule you absolutely must follow. The dual channel rule. Always run 2 sticks of RAM instead of a single stick if your motherboard supports it. Using a single 16 gigabyte stick forces your CPU to communicate over just one lane, but splitting that into 2 8 gigabyte sticks opens up a second lane, essentially doubling the memory bandwidth available to your processor. Running a single stick is basically putting a massive speed limit on your system's potential.
To make sure everything runs flawlessly, follow these 4 final steps. First, verify your motherboard compatibility. Next, install your 2 sticks in the correct dual-channel slots, which is usually slots 2 and 4. Then, boot your computer into the BIOS. And finally, enable XMP if you're on an Intel platform, or EXP if you're on AMD. Now, this is a critical procedure that gets overlooked way too often. Right out of the box, high-speed RAM defaults to a minimum safe speed, usually around 2133 MHz. If you skip this one toggle in the BIOS, your premium, expensive memory is just sitting there idling, completely failing to deliver the performance you actually paid for.
Which leaves us with one final, pretty important question to consider about your own setup right now. Are you actually getting the memory speed you paid for, or is your BIOS quietly holding your system back? I highly encourage you to go check your system settings today, apply what we've talked about, and unlock the true potential of your hardware. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.